Hi everyone, it's fantastic to see so many people here. I'm over the moon. What I wanted to do is just find out how many of you have actually produced something in the past. Lots, okay, cool. Just trying to pitch you may find that some of the stuff I talk about today is self-evident, but hopefully there'll be some tips in there which are interesting for you. Just to make it clear, one of the things that I just wanted to clarify is that at Matchbox, when we think of producers, we generally think of two types of producers. We've got the producer we think of as the showrunner, who's the one who looks after the creative vision of the show. And we've also got the practical producer who looks after making the whole thing happen. And today I'm going to be talking more about the practical producing role. When we first started Matchbox, we, as producers, were tending to do everything in one person, which is these days really difficult, particularly with television series, because there's so much to do. What we now tend to do is have two producers working, one as the showrunner and one as the practical producer. And we've found that works really well for us because you've got someone else to really bounce off. You can split the responsibilities and you have a lot more fun. So that's what I'll be talking about. I thought that what I'd do first of all is just give you a brief summary of how I got into producing, just to give you a sense of my background. And part of the reason I'm doing that is to later reinforce that I think there are no rules about how you get into producing. It's something which lots and lots of different types of people can do. And I'll be talking about looking at three questions. The first one is, what does a producer do? The second one is, what's an ideal background for a producer? And the third one is, what skills do good producers need? And I'd be really interested if at any point you want to ask questions or clarify anything, please just stick your hand up, because from my point of view, that interaction is really interesting. I'm always very, very interested in feedback and setting up a dialogue, so please feel free to butt in at any point. Okay, so my background, I started my life as a classical violinist right through childhood and right through my late teens and into university. I trained as a classical violinist, and I thought my career was going to be as a classical violinist. I was about to go to Europe to study, and I thought I'd be playing in an orchestra. I was at university. I became interested in ancient and oriental music, and from there I sort of segued into looking at what was happening in New York, and it was Lou Reed and Velvet Underground, and my whole life just went, oh my God, there's a whole world out there. So I completely changed direction and got into drama. I went to the New Zealand Drama School and became an actor. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I really believe that often when we're young, we think that we have to identify one thing and stay with it. And I don't think that's true. I think you can actually reinvent yourself quite a few times in your life. And particularly if you do want to end up as a producer, I think that's a fantastic thing to do, because it gives you a breadth of interest and experience, which is incredibly useful. Anyway, so I went to drama school. I was working in New Zealand. I came to Australia. I kept working as an actor. And I was getting more and more frustrated with the lack of control I had over my destiny, because as an actor, it's really hard to have any sort of control. So the year I actually managed to support myself from acting for the whole year, which sounds crazy, but it was such a hard thing to do, because most actors spend time doing, other jobs, their slash job. And that year I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to do something that I could have control over. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew that it was probably something to do with film, because I just loved film and I love storytelling. I knew that I wanted something which gave me some sort of a control, because I recognised I had that sort of control freak element to my character. So I rang the producers, a number of producers I'd worked with in film, and said, I think this is what I want to do. I don't quite know what a producer does. And I ended up working as the assistant for a fantastic producer called Brian Rosen, who was quite an experienced producer and had set up a company called Hoyts Productions. Brian was brilliant. He threw me in the deep end, but he didn't let me sink. But he really challenged me. But the other thing he did, which is something I always try and do with anyone I'm mentoring, was he was incredibly generous with contacts, and he introduced me to a lot of amazing film people. He'd take me to lunch with him and with them, and there's still people who I will ring up if I need very particular advice. I've still got that bunch of people who I treat as mentors, and I think that's fantastic. So after I was working with Brian, I started working as a production manager and line producer. I worked my way up to producing, working a lot with Penny Chapman, who is a fantastic producer. We worked together on a number of different projects. And then in 2008, Tony Ayres, Helen Bowden, Penny, Michael McMahon and I decided to form a company called Matchbox Pictures. So there were 5 producers. Tony and Michael were in Melbourne. Helen, Penny and I were in Sydney. We had an assistant in Sydney and an assistant in Melbourne. And the reason we decided to do it was that we'd been working as independent producers for a long time. The really hard thing about being an independent producer is that it's sort of it's a boom and bust cycle, so that when you're in development, you have no money and you're trying really, really hard to get a project ready for the market. And the challenge is that you have no money, so you've got to keep it moving, but at the same time, development is the one time when you really have the chance to get the scripts right, particularly with drama, and it's the same with doco. So that's a tricky thing. And then you go into production and you have the money coming through, but you are so flat out you can't develop anything else. So you get to the end of production, you're back in the development cycle, and it's really hard. So the 5 of us had been doing it for a long time. Penny and I had been working together a bit. Tony and Michael worked together. And we all got together and decided, okay, let's try it. Let's form a company. We knew we had fairly complementary skills. We were all quite scared about it because one of the pleasures of being an independent producer is autonomy. You're not answerable to other people. So we were all a bit scared about what would happen, whether we'd be able to get on, make decisions together. And we did have challenges. I remember when we started The Slap, which I don't know if any of you know that series. It was an early series we did from Christos Tsiolkas' novel of the same name. And when we were looking at optioning that book, 4 of us thought it was a good idea, and the 5th was completely against it. They felt that the character of Rosie was so hideous that there was no way we could get an audience because she was just so horrible. And we fought. It took us about a week of fighting to get to a position where we all agreed that we would option the book, or try and option the book and make the series. And that was our sort of seminal series. It was the first one Matchbox did, and it sold really, really well. It had a big audience in Australia, travelled overseas incredibly well, and went into profit, which is amazing. In 2010, we'd been going, the first year of our formation, we just treated Matchbox as like an umbrella organisation. And then after a year, we went, this is crazy, we actually have to merge. So we did. And then a year later, NBC Universal asked if they could buy into the company. And they're one of the largest media organisations in the world. What happened was that Michael Edelstein, who's the head of what's now International Studios based in London, it's just a small, tiny bit of NBC Universal, was a fan of Tony Ayres and Michael McMahon's show Bogan Pride, which was a crazy musical comedy starring Rebel Wilson that they'd done some years earlier. And Michael came out to Australia, and he was actively looking for a company to buy into. We didn't know this, but he rang Tony and said, I'd like to meet you. So Tony came up to Sydney and met Michael, and in Tony's inevitable way pitched every single project we had to Michael, and Michael went, they're quite interesting projects, said to Tony, okay, I'd like to invite you and your partners for dinner. So we went to dinner with them. They'd organised a private room at Rockpool Bar and Grill in Sydney. So we had dinner, 10:30 at night. They suddenly said to us, we'd like to buy into the company. We've got to go to another meeting now. Yeah, sure. We've paid for dessert and coffee, so just stay here as long as you like and think about it. And we were like, what? So it took 10 months of due diligence on both sides, because we needed to be very careful that we could work with these guys. And 10 months later, NBCU bought into the company. And in 2013, they fully bought the company. So we're now a fully owned subsidiary of NBC Universal, but the creative control is very firmly in our hands, which is fantastic. So that's sort of a brief history of my trajectory. And so now what I'll do is I'll just get into the first dot point for me, which is, what does a producer do? And the producer has overall control of every aspect of a production. They bring together and approve the whole team. They create an environment where the talents of the cast and crew can flourish. And the big thing is, the producer is the person who has to ensure the finished program is a success. So to do that, they have to steer the project right through, from before it starts really, right through to completion and past, because as any producer in the room will know, that you keep going for years and years. It doesn't stop just when you've delivered it. It keeps going and going and going. So you're looking after it for years and years and years. The producer is often the first person to get involved in the project. There are 4 phases of production and development, and the producers are often responsible for coming up with the idea, or for choosing the screenplay, securing the rights, choosing the writers, the story editing team, raising the finance, and supervising the development process right through. In pre-production, the emphasis is on bringing together key members of the creative team, the director, cinematographer, production designer, key cast, raising the money. Once the initial finance is in place, selecting other key production office personnel and heads of departments. And then you get into things like approving locations, studio hire, final shooting script, production schedule, etc. And I guess the big thing is that the more time and money spent in pre-production, the less you're likely to waste in production. And that's a tension that producers are always struggling to contain, because we all know that thing about pre-production, but it's a really hard juggle to make the budget work, so you have got the amount of pre-production time you need. Once the film's in production, it's like the juggernaut is off, you know. I always feel like it's the time I like the least, in a way, because you can't, you know, you've just got to hope that you've put everything in place and then it will go, and you troubleshoot. You can't plan, you're just troubleshooting as you go. And, you know, you're looking at cost reports all the time, you're approving any script changes, all that sort of thing. You're liaising with your investors. Post-production, you're overseeing the post, looking at all the cuts, giving feedback, dealing with finance and distribution companies, starting to work on the marketing. And I guess that's sort of the cycle of it. I was really pleased that Ken did the health and safety stuff, because one of the things that I think is really important to remember as a producer, you are responsible for all the people working for you from a health and safety point of view, and it's really important that you look after their well-being on every single level. And sometimes in the heat of production, that can become something that people forget. So I'm very strong on that.